Have you ever left a hate comment online?
No, I don't think so.
It's like for Jimmy John's. They just didn't get my order done. I don't know. They were supposed to be freaky fast, but then I was late for school and I got no lunch, so I was pretty upset.
I had a TikTok video blow up. It has over 2 million views. And there's just people commenting some rude thing. And someone commented, "I'd rather get divorced than do this any day." And I said, her name was Yannick. And I said, "Well, aren't you pleasant, Yannick?"
So Club Penguin, right? This one time, a guy, he beat me in a sled race, and then he let me know, so I had to type something mean right back to him.
I just called them stupid, and okay, they deserved it, in my opinion, Yeah. They weren't being very nice to other people.
What do you think of people who leave hate comments?
I think that there are people that feel like they can't share their comments in real life, and so they look for places online to be able to express their feelings, even if they're more negative than usual.
Just spread the hate,
Hello, welcome to the Take a Leap podcast. Take a Leap is a student-run podcast dedicated to highlighting the works of religious people. My name is Leah.
And I'm Josh.
And today we're super blessed to have Reverend Brandan Robertson. He's a noted author, activist, public theologian. He works at intersections of spirituality, sexuality, and social renewal.
Brandon, thank you so much for coming on today.
Yeah, thank you for joining us.
I've always been almost Mormon, so my whole life I've been so fascinated, and I've done all the sites, and I've been to BYU before, and so yeah, I was super excited when you all reached out, and I love the kind of conversations that you all are cultivating. So again, thanks for having me.
Brandon, would you mind telling us about this title, TikTok Pastor? Do you like that title? How did it come to be? Do you feel like it fits?
It's an honor to be called the TikTok pastor. I think the only reason I pull back from it a little bit is just because now there are so many pastors on TikTok that it feels weird to be called the TikTok pastor. So yeah. I'm a TikTok pastor.
Right.
Yeah.
Sweet.
You don't want to take all the credit.
Yeah, totally. There's so many people doing such good work. So
Awesome. So when Josh and I were preparing for this interview, we kind of were joking which came first, the TikToker or the pastor? So we'd love to hear about which one came first, and then also just why you became a pastor.
Yeah, pastor came first, and I've been working in churches since I was 12 years old. Quite literally, after that, I got a job as a janitor at my Baptist church, and then I was the pastoral intern at my mega church that I ended up at, and then went to college studying to be a pastor in Chicago and worked in churches that whole time. So I've been working in churches since I was 12, and it really was hearing a pastor stand up in the front of a church when I was 12, and I was suicidal, and I felt like my life had no purpose or meaning, and articulate a message about a God who had plans for all of us, and a God who could redeem all of the pain that was in our lives and actually make something beautiful out of it. That good news is such good news that I couldn't think of any other way to spend my life than figuring out how to tell people that good news. And as I said, very early on, I started doing that in many ways. I was a street preacher for a while I was in high school. So you could have found me out on the streets of Baltimore, Maryland every Thursday night with a Bible and some signs and preaching at people. I had blogs. I had Prayer Warriors Radio was my podcast when I was 16 years old. I've always been in this work of trying to shepherd people towards Christ, towards this good news. Again, today, my theology is so different. And for instance, I don't believe that you need to be a Christian in order to be forgiven and go to heaven.
Absolutely. We both come from an interfaith podcast, and now we're working on this one. But I think that's what I've learned the most, and what surprised me is that we all want the best for the world, and there are so many commonalities across traditions that are beautiful and really strengthen us when we work together with people of other religions, or Christians working with Christians of another denomination.
Totally.
There's so much power there.
Yeah. My theology is quite expansive now, and yet I still believe in telling people about Jesus and upholding his good news, because whether you're a Christian or not, I think everybody can have something to learn from the example of Jesus.
So we'd love to know a little bit about why you first joined TikTok. What made you get on? And did you intend for this to all happen?
Yeah, I planned it out completely, and no, I'm just kidding. But in some senses, that is kind of true. I think I grew up, I'm a millennial, and I grew up on the internet, and I grew up on social media. And really, back when I was like 12 years old, I had my first podcast on the internet.
Wow.
I had a blog back in the day called The Gospel According to Brandan that I had from like 12 to 18. So in some sense, I've been doing social media ministry most of my life, but TikTok was something I was resistant to, like so many millennials. We thought it was a weird app that kids were on to do dancing back in 2019, 2020. But I was pastoring a church in San Diego at the time, and the pandemic happened. And so we shut down our operations, and I found myself with a lot of time on my hands. And so I got on TikTok. I started doing really horrible dancing videos. And then I was like, I'm not going to do this, but let me just do what I love, which is to talk about theology, to talk about religion, and see what happens. And literally within the first 6 months, I think I got 50,000 followers. Most of them were young people, like high school age, that were really engaged in conversations about religion. And these weren't surface level conversations. We were talking about like deep biblical theology and history. And I was just blown away, because the narrative has always been people are becoming less religious. Young people don't want anything to do with religion. And now here I am 4 or 5 years later, and 220 something thousand followers later, and 5 million views, and thousands of conversations I've gotten to have with people all around the world about things that really matter, matters of spirituality, matters of justice. And of course, you mentioned a lot of my work has been around helping the LGBT community reconcile their faith and their sexuality. And that's more than I ever could have dreamed of. It's been a really incredible career change in some senses. Like most of my ministry is now online, but I'm really grateful that I have this opportunity and this platform.
Yeah, that's amazing. In our church, we have this thing called seminary, and I was a seminary teacher. I don't know if you're familiar with that. For like a year, I was a seminary teacher. And it's really interesting to me that young people are actually, like, they care a ton about religion and spirituality. And particularly the big questions I think that I got were like, oh, like, what about LGBTQ plus people? Like, what about this and this? I had a kid come up to me. He's like, well, I'm gay, but how does that fit with Jesus? I'm like, it totally does, you know?
Yeah.
So yeah. I think it's super important what you're doing. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, thank you. And I think, honestly, I think it's something the LDS Church does well. I mean, I remember back in high school, there were 2 kids, me and one other kid who happened to be a member of the church. And we would get together after his seminary class early in the morning before school started, and we would literally sit in a piano practice room and talk about religion. Yeah. And so in my mind, I thought we were the only ones that were interested in talking about these things. But it seems from where I sit, this next generation, Gen Z, is actually more spiritually hungry. And it makes sense, because our world's on fire in a way that it wasn't even when I was in high school. And so, yeah, it's very important.
Absolutely. So you've talked a little bit about your faith journey starting from a young age, sounds like 12, around there. Can you tell us a little bit how you came to be a person of faith?
Totally. So, I mean, I grew up in a non-religious home in Maryland, but strangely, you can see kind of God working throughout my entire life, because my family was poor, and yet somehow I ended up going to a Christian preschool. I don't know how they afforded it. I've never talked to them about it, but I was there. And I think at that very early age, having kind of a Christian foundation implanted in my mind was actually a really good thing. And I didn't realize that 12 years later, or however many years, 6 years later from preschool, I ended up going to church with my neighbors, and I had a major conversion experience. I experienced the love of God. I grew up in a very abusive household, alcoholic father, and so to go to church and learn about a heavenly Father who loved me more than my earthly father could, and to learn that God had a plan for my life and that it wasn't all meaningless like I had come to believe, that changed me and saved me from the brink of suicide as a young person. And within a couple of months of becoming a Christian in this Baptist church, I felt a distinct call from God to give my life to tell other people about this message. And so really from 12 years old to now I'm 32, I've been really devoted to sharing the good news of Jesus with as many people as I can. And of course, that my understanding of what that good news is has changed a lot, because also around 12 years old, I was hitting puberty, and I had the first moments where I realized that I was gay. And my church was very clear that no LGBT person entered the kingdom of heaven. And so that caused a lot of crisis and turmoil for me at a very young age. But the one thing that has never changed is the sense that I know I encountered the love of God and continue to encounter the love of God in my life. And that message of good news, of great joy for all people that Jesus came to embody is what I want to share with the world.
That's incredible. To me, it's kind of mind-boggling because at 12 years old, I think I was more concerned with Harry Potter than church at all. Or, like,
Sure.
wow, it's like super impressive that you're like, oh yeah, like I'm going to join the church and go all in, and I'm going to have a blog, and I'm going to,
Yeah.
and I love that. I'm like, yeah, that's not me as a 12-year-old, but
It's okay. I mean, I was a bit of a nerd, and I needed a thing to be my thing. And so while it sounds noble because it's religion, I also just think I was a kind of a loner kid, and the church was a place that actually welcomed me and embraced me and said, even in all of your weirdness, you're welcome here.
do you feel like you're constantly receiving revelation from God in the sense like, okay, I should do TikTok now, and that's like a clear direction from God, or things like that? Like, how does that work for you?
Yeah, for me, and I think it's probably similar in both of our traditions. Jesus in John chapter 3 speaks about the Spirit as a wind, and he says, no one knows from where it comes or where it goes. And then he has this beautiful line. He says, so it is with everyone born of the Spirit. And the way I've understood that in my journey is that the Spirit of God is unexpected and usually is pushing you in unexpected directions, shows up in unexpected places and among unexpected people. And so all of this journey, whether it's TikTok ministry or now I'm pastoring a church that's not part of my tradition. It's called a Reformed church, which is not my theology or background, but like God opened the door and said, be with this community. And now I'm with this incredible community. The Spirit, I think, is always guiding us on kind of a winding, not straight and narrow path, despite what a lot of Christian people believe. But I do sense there are times when I get on TikTok and there's just a palpable sense that the Spirit of God is moving. And to be honest, there are other times I get on TikTok, and anybody who follows me knows that sometimes I get involved in controversy and I say provocative things just because that's what happens when you're in that environment. And those probably aren't Spirit motivated moments. But I think the one thing I do love and I do think is a benefit of social media is that so many of us are living our lives on it, for better or for worse. And that allows people to see you authentically. And anybody who follows my TikTok will know within a month of watching me that I'm a flawed human being and I don't have it all figured out. And I actually think that's a good thing for people to see, especially people who have this negative image of religious people as perfect or self-righteous. That's not me.
A month is pretty good. For me, it'd be like, first 5 minutes. They're like,
Well, to be fair, I've slowed down the amount that I TikTok. So if I TikToked at a regular pace, it would be much sooner.
Right. Such a humanizing way to look at social media, though. Like, nobody's
Totally.
perfect. Even online.
Yeah.
Especially online, probably.
Especially online. And there's filters to help us be perfect and look perfect. But the beautiful thing about TikTok and like the video era that we're in is that it really is just people sharing their day-to-day lives and their very human experience.
Yeah. So I feel like we've all heard this question before, but I wonder if your spirituality or your religion play any part in it. And that is, how do you deal with hate comments or negativity? Do you find that your spirituality kind of grounds you or helps you through those?
Yeah. I mean, the guiding principle in my understanding of Christianity today is it comes from the book of 1 John, and it says, God is love, and perfect love casts out all fear. I really think that's the message that Jesus really came to embody at its core. Anywhere that there is fear, God is not. And anywhere that there is love, God is present. So I try to keep that in mind as I'm engaging on social media. I can go back and look at my Facebook from when I was 12. And I was saying some of the same crazy, mean, fundamentalistic things to people on my Facebook as a young kid. And I remember that's because I was so afraid. I was afraid of God. I was afraid of judgment. I was afraid of everything. And that fear caused me to lash out and judge gay people in school. In my high school, I went around telling gay people they were going to hell, even though I knew I was struggling with my sexuality. And so there's a level of empathy that I have for a lot of the young folks in particular that are on my comments every single day saying, you're a heretic, you're going to burn in hell, you're a false teacher. And it's like, I pray that in 10 years, you'll go through the same kind of journey I went through, where you realize God is more gracious than you understand. And these questions are a lot more nuanced than you might think of right now. So that's the best response I can give. There was a time 2 years ago where somebody created a social media account where they were threatening me literally every day and putting my information online. And like, that's another side of this world of being online that is very dangerous. And while I did have to rely on my relationship with God, I also allowed a lot of fear to overtake me in those moments. And sometimes I would, and still do, lash out and say rude comments right back to people or make a snarky TikTok video. It's a constant journey of trying to be made more into the image of Christ and recognizing that sometimes I'm going to fall short and be just a snarky back. And I'm sorry for that for anybody who's received that.
Right. We're all trying our best, but it's still not going to be the best. Leah and I were deep diving through your social media, through everything that you do. I mean, we didn't find any dancing TikTok videos, unfortunately.
Years ago, they're buried.
Maybe we'll try after this. But one of the things that we were both like, holy cow, it's crazy, is the number of books that you've written and contributed to. Something like 23. How are you so prolific?
It is insane when I look back at it. I have a couple thoughts about it. One, writing became a form of therapy for me when I was really young. I self-published my first book, which is not counted in those 23, but I self-published my first book when I was 16. Wow. And it was because I come from a tradition. I grew up in an evangelical megachurch with 8,000 members every Sunday, and my pastor wrote books and had a radio show and was on TV. And so in some way, my vision of what a pastor was somebody who's doing all of these things. And so very early, I started writing, and it really became therapeutic. There's this line from Joan Didion, I believe, who said, "I don't write what I think, I write to know what I think." And I found that to be true for me, that when I sit down, I'll have a broad topic in mind, but I don't actually know what I believe or think about something until I've processed it through writing. I've written 11 books and then contributed it to the other, however many that is. But each one of those books began as, here's a broad topic that I feel like I need to say something about. One of my books was called Filled to be Emptied, and it was about how to deal with privilege. And I was a pastor trying to talk to my congregation about white privilege after George Floyd's death, and was like, I need to figure out how to think about this. And so I took a Bible verse that I thought was a good reference to the topic of privilege, and I took 6 months and just worked out what I thought the scripture was saying and what I actually believed about privilege, and that turned into a book. And so that's really what I'm doing every time I write. And for better or for worse, I put it all out into the world. And I disagree with a lot of what I've written 10 years ago. But again, I think my way of doing ministry is being real and saying, yeah, I said some things 5 years ago that I disagree with. I have a book out there that I might not align with anymore. That's okay. It shows that we are all on a journey. Our faith, our beliefs, our politics evolve. And I think people have been very gracious in my own career to be like, yeah, my own faith has evolved as well.
I feel like it's clear that you're wanting to have religion go in a place where it's super inclusive and where everyone can feel that, look, God loves you no matter what. Yeah. What would you say is like the key to building a more inclusive religious community?
Yeah. I mean, that's a great question. I think the call of the gospel for all of us, no matter we're liberal, conservative, traditional, or progressive, is that we should always be asking, who is not being included at this table, and how do we offer a space for them? Because that's exactly how Jesus did his ministry. It was always going to the people that everyone else were scandalized he was talking to, and everyone else said, you should not recline at that person's table, or you should not heal that woman or touch that person because they're unclean or impure or immoral. And that is the example Jesus left for us. And I am really encouraged that more and more people are leaning into that message in our day.
Yeah, that you have to realize, the greatest of these is love.
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
Lead with that. Yeah, I love that.
Mm-hmm. And that you point people to Jesus as an example for go to the marginalized, go to people who are not feeling this love and love them.
Yeah, and I love what pointing people to Jesus is it. Let him do the work of transforming. Let God do the work that only God can do.
Yeah, we're not the example.
Yeah,
we just point you to him.
Yes.
Yeah, that's such an important message that you're sharing. So during that time when everything was happening, maybe in college or even in high school, if you told yourself then where you are now, do you think you would be surprised? Or do you think you'd be like, well, of course, I love making TikTok dances. Naturally, this is where my life went.
Yeah, I mean, where I would be right now, if we could go back in time, 12-year-old Brandon or high school Brandon or college Brandon would be in my TikTok feed calling me a false teacher and a heretic. And I think we know deep down where our journeys are going to go at some subconscious level. And so even while I was afraid of people like me, I think all along in my journey, I had a sense that I was going to be different, that my faith journey was not going to align with the communities that I was a part of. And I think that's why God made me so curious, made me so unfaithful to one denomination of Christianity, and I explored them all. And it really has equipped me for this moment that we're in, where we live in this interconnected, globalized world, where this podcast is going to be viewed by people from all sorts of different backgrounds that just 10 years ago could not have been reached. And I think I just feel very grateful that I've been so curious, and that's not my own doing, it's kind of my wiring, and I knew all along that my faith journey was going to look different, even though I wouldn't have said that to you 10 years ago.
Right. I love the honesty, though. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you for asking.
We don't want to keep you forever.
Yeah.
In the time that we were in this podcast, you probably could have written like 10 more books. I totally appreciate you coming on, though, and sharing what you have shared. Is there anything that you want to share that we haven't gotten to? Is there any question that we should have asked that we are not smart enough to ask?
I think you all are brilliant, and I really appreciate you for cultivating these spaces. The thing that if people could walk away from this conversation with a lesson that I could impart is just that. We're living in a moment where there is so much to be afraid of, where we are told to fear each other, Democrat and Republican, Christian and non-Christian, gay person and straight person. But we are all children of God. We are all part of the same divine family. We are all at our core one. And if we can get back to that sense of oneness and recognize that we are not enemies, but that we are actually a part of the same family. And I think Jesus is the best model of somebody who did that very well. And so let's push against fear and embrace love. That's what I'm trying to do on TikTok. That's what I think we're all trying to do. And that's my hope for our future.
Perfectly said. Thank you so much, Brandon. It's been awesome talking to you.
Yeah, thank you for joining us.
Yeah, thank you so much for inviting me.
A huge thanks to our boy Brandan Robertson, aka the TikTok pastor, aka Take a Leap's bestie. This episode of Take a Leap was produced by me, Josh Orton, and Leah King. This episode was produced by BYU Radio. Please continue spreading the word and liking our stuff. I know probably like 3 people total listen to these credits, including my grandma. Hi, Grandma. But I would love it if those 3 people shared this podcast with everyone. Maybe if you go door to door, I'll get you something from the break room of BYU Broadcasting. Who knows?